Ahoy, and welcome back to Leia's Library. Find yourself a cozy corner, get yourself a cozy drink, and let's get started. Today, we are going to be talking about my favorite book monsters. These are basically just that, monsters that I really like from books that I also really like. And it's spooky season, so we gotta talk about spooky things, contractually obligated. So, let's get into it. First monster on the list is the OG, the classic, the only Frankenstein's monster from Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. For those of you who are unaware, Frankenstein is a classic sci-fi horror about an arrogant scientist named Frankenstein who sets out to prove that he can challenge death itself, only for his successful experiment to have devastating consequences. Of course, Frankenstein's monster had to be here on my list of favorite monsters, although it is up to you to decide whether or not he truly is a monster. I love this book so much. It's one of my favorite books. I love the monster and the pages and pages and pages we get of his beautiful but pain-soaked words. I love how it's left up to the reader to decide who was the real villain of the story. Although I think we can all agree on who the real villain of the story was. It's Frankenstein. He's a jerk. So yeah, as far as intelligent, relatable monsters go, he's a 10 out of 10. Gosh, I love this book so much. Next up, we have one of my all-time favorite life-scarring monsters, which is Rawhead from The Haunting of Alaizabel Cray by Chris Wooding. This book is a YA steampunk horror. It follows a 17-year-old witch hunter named Thaniel and his mentor and friend Kathleen. And in this world, there are creatures and monsters, and witch hunters are in charge of getting rid of them and making sure they don't kill people. And it's on one of these hunts that the duo runs into Alaizabel Cray. Alaizabel is possessed by something that is turning her into this unearthly magnet, where she's just creatures and beasts and all these evil things are just drawn to her. Thaniel and Kathleen set out to discover why this is, and they find out that Alaizabel's condition, for lack of a better word, might actually put all of humanity at risk. So they set out to stop that from happening. So Rawhead. Hello darkness, my old friend. Rawhead is one of the monsters / creatures in this book. He's also, I found this up while writing the script for this video, that he's also a real life urban legend, or not urban legend, that's not the right word for it. What is the right word for it? Sort of like a ghost story. He's like a real world boogeyman, usually called Bloody Bones or Rawhead and Bloody Bones. And in the book too, there is Rawhead and Bloody Bones, but they seem to be two separate entities. And Rawhead is the one that freaked me out the most. So in the book, Rawhead's shtick is that he stalks his prey invisibly from behind. So if you're walking alone and you hear a footstep that's out of sync with your footsteps, so if you're walking and you hear a that's Rawhead, he's behind you. But he can only attack you if you look over your shoulder 3 times. So in order to escape him, you just have to keep walking and you can't look behind you. And that really freaks me out. My friend and I, back when I first read this and I was telling her about it, we would play tricks on each other where we would be like walking and one of us would start walking out of sync with the other one and then act like Rawhead was behind us, chasing us. Kids are weird. So yeah, he freaked me out big time. Next is The Monster from A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness / Siobhan Dowd. This is a YA / middle grade magical realism fiction. It is about Connor, who has the same dream every night about a monster, Only this time when he wakes up, the monster is at his window and it wants something. So this story is so heart-wrenching and awful, but beautiful, but awful. And it's truly a phenomenal book. And part of that is the monster and the message that he brings, which is that like things are complex and people are complex, and people can be both very good and very bad, and you can have feelings that are both very good and very bad, and that's okay. And I need to move on before I start crying, so let's move on to the next one, which is The Bonesman from Wundersmith by Jessica Townsend, which is a middle grade fantasy about Morrigan Crow, who is a cursed child, which means that she is fated to die on her 11th birthday. And when the day comes, Morrigan is awaiting her demise, only instead of death showing up, it's a mysterious and jubilant man named Jupiter North who shows up and whisks her away to a magical, whimsical world called Nevermore, a place where Morrigan might finally be able to call home. So I love this story a lot. It's a series. I love it so much. And the world of Nevermore is full of all sorts of delightful creatures and beings. And then there are the Bonesmen. I don't know what it is about them that freaks me out so much, but the first time they were described, I had such a visceral reaction to it. I was like, oh. They're creatures that are more of like a malevolent force that are compiled of various bones and debris lying around, and they walk with the characteristic clatter of these clacking bones, and just like hearing that sound in my head is already enough to be like, ah. And just the image of these bones like slowly being drawn in and piling on top of each other to form something that looks almost human but is not human. I don't like Uncanny Valley stuff. That's a no from me. Next up is Cerberus from the Percy Jackson and the Olympians series by Riordan, which is a middle grade fantasy about Percy Jackson, who's a boy who finds out that he's a demigod, meaning that his father is one of the Greek gods from the Greek mythology pantheon. And we follow his quests and his adventures throughout the series. Cerberus is a giant three-headed dog from Greek mythology, and I loved him. I love Greek mythology. As the vast majority of people who came out as queer in their 20s, I loved Greek mythology growing up. And Cerberus is a very good boy who loves to play fetch with red rubber balls. 10 out of 10, I love him. Next. So next is a monster I have significantly different feelings about. It is the creature from Scavengard from the Ember Blade by Chris Whitting, which is an adult epic fantasy. This follows Aaron, who has lived by the rules his whole life. He's never questioned the status quo until one day when his father is charged with treason and executed, which sends Aaron and his best friend Cade to a prison camp. He's rescued by a man who hates him and pursued by inhuman forces, and Aaron slowly has to accept that everything he learned growing up was a lie. And a revolution is slowly brewing, and Aaron is being drawn into it whether he wants to or not. That is a very terrible summary of this book. Please read it, it's excellent, I love it. It's very Lord of the Rings adjacent. So this book, much like Lord of the Rings, is like an epic quest sort of book. And at some point, our group has to pass through this place called Scavengard. And Scavengard is rumored to have a monster within its depths. They think it's mostly superstition until the sun goes down and they start to hear something very large, something with lots of teeth, something that's hungry. The brilliant thing about this creature is that we are never given a description of it because none of the characters really see it. The characters only catch these glimpses of it. So that's all we get are these tiny glimpses of teeth and eyes and sheer horror. Except for one character who does see it fully, and he is then haunted and tortured by what he saw, and he's never able to speak of it. He just gets these PTSD flashbacks of eyes and teeth, and It's just so brilliantly described. Wooding really knows how to do horror, and my goodness, does this creature freak me the heck out. Just how it's built up and how all of the characters are horrified, like existentially horrified by just the thought of this creature or a glimpse of this creature. Oh my gosh. Last on the list is The Other Mother from Coraline by Neil Gaiman. This is a children's horror about a young girl named Coraline who just moved into a new house with her parents. Her parents are quite busy. They often don't have a lot of time for her, so she spends her time exploring. And in her explorations, she finds a door that leads to nowhere. It's just a bricked up wall. Until at night, when Coraline goes to it again and she finds a secret passage that leads to a house that's exactly like her own, but everything is better. The food's better, the toys are better, but there's something else in the other house. There's Coraline's other father and her other mother. And her other mother wants Coraline to stay with her forever. Other mother, she's just... She seems so benign and normal at first, but then like little things are off. Just tiny things, like her fingernails are kind of long at first, and then it grows and grows. So, on top of, she has buttons for eyes, which already would be too much of a red flag for me. But it's like she has button for eyes, but like, okay, you can get around that. And then, her fingers are kind of long. That's unusual. And now she's eating beetles like they're candy and offering some to Coraline as if that's normal. Huh? The horror just slowly builds around her until she becomes this unholy monster, and I hate it. But I love it. It's done so well. And that is it for this list. Let me know which monster was your favorite, or if you have any favorite book monsters. I would love to hear about them. You can find me elsewhere on Instagram at Leia Like the Princess, where you can also find my little embroidery and art store, Moonlit Cat Creations, or you can go directly to the website at moonlitcatcreations.com. As always, thank you for listening, and until next time, stay spooky.